we ought to change the way we talk about this, because we talk about work-life balance. But when we say work-life balance, that automatically, by the sequence of the words, puts a priority on the first, work, life, as if life ought to fit into whatever we're working, right? And yet, I think if we would simply change the order of the words, it would reset our mind and our actions would be different. Whereas if we think about a life work balance,
welcome to the podcast today, Mr. Scott Margason, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to have a wide-ranging discussion with Scott regarding business leadership, because he has more than 30 years of experience as a consulting partner working with senior leaders across the globe with at least half of the Fortune 500, probably more. And that cumulative experience has given Scott a really unique and deeply informed perspective. So first of all, welcome, Scott. It is good to see you, and looking forward to the conversation. Is there, in terms of introducing you, is there any color commentary you would add to kind of fill in the blanks in terms of who is Scott Margason?
Who is Scott Margason? Well, first, thanks for bringing me on the podcast. I love the work that you're doing, and spreading the message about leadership is critical, and it's absolutely critical. So it's a privilege to be on. So thank you. So Scott Margason, wow, I am a kind of a multifaceted person that started off being a human doer, and I think over the years, with all the things that have happened and gone on, I have balanced that a little bit with being a human being. Maybe we'll talk about that in the podcast a little bit. We'll see. I don't know. But it's certainly made my life more fulfilling for me. And I think it's made life better for those that I work with.
Well, and, knowing some of the people that you work with over the last several years, as we've had conversations and as your name has come up, I was thinking to myself, what are some of the words that are used to describe Scott? And it's really interesting because it's a unique set of adjectives. The words I wrote down were kind, gentle, a good soul, the most decent human being I've ever worked for. That's a direct quote from one of your direct reports.
Wow.
And it's interesting. I mean, not that it shouldn't be a surprise that a senior leader would be kind and decent and a good soul, but in fact, it's not it's not the most common descriptor. Usually, you'll get driven, don't cross him, focused, whatever, outcome oriented. So, how have you managed to be so? I'll use the word decent. How have you managed to be such a decent human being and grow a successful leadership career in a very challenging competitive business?
Well, there's not a single answer to that, but a couple things come to mind. First, probably who I am and everything about me actually emanates out of my faith as a Christian, and so that sets a set of standards, and it sets a set of expectations to how do I'll use the word love, but how do I love others, right? And so that's number one. Number two, life takes a lot of twists and turns. And I was very fortunate to be married to an amazing woman for 34 years that was much more of a human being than a human doer. She was in business, but she had a business career, and then she had a counseling career and all that. And I learned so much from her that it really, over time, it balanced that out for me, being a human doer versus a human being. And then as we started into COVID, I lost her to cancer. And that just the last 4 years have crystallized for me that connection between my head and my heart. It sounds strange, but I went to counseling after losing Alma, and I thought I was going to work on grief. And my counselor said, "The first thing we're going to do is connect your head and your heart." And I'm like, "What? Like what? What?" But that's exactly what I needed to do. And now I think differently. I act differently. People see me differently. My kids say, you know, "This is the best version of you we've ever known." And I said, I wish Alma could have, experienced that. And they said, "Dad, part of the reason who you are and is because of what you went through and that loss." It's like, and that's true, but I think it's the combination. Are we willing to actually go through what we go through? And I have a philosophy that what I go through is not only for me.
Mhm.
And so as opposed to it being like a dead end, I feel like what I go through, if that can help or benefit others, then it's up to me to kind of share that in a way that others can understand, respond, and then act on. And so I guess it long answer to life has a lot of twists and turns, and that's what I guess got me to where I am.
Well, and I think if there is a way to, even in a small way, help others make a similar profound shift without having to go through such a huge loss,
Right,
that would be fantastic. But
right.
not always easy, because when we don't experience loss, then it becomes kind of theoretical. Like I know I want to be a kinder human being. I want to be a deeper, thoughtful leader. I want to be all of those things. Um, and I've wanted to be those things for a while, but it's maybe not quite as easy
Right.
when you're not experiencing such a profound life event. But I think we can learn, obviously, through the experience, and unfortunately through the pain of others. There have to be points where that gets tested,
Mhm.
where you know um, what your soul tells you you should do,
Right.
and then the other part of you, the more driven part, the human doer part of you, says, well, I need to deliver results. How do
Exactly.
you how do you
How do
manage
you
that
balance?
tension?
Sometimes not very well. It is a tension. It's a similar tension to when I decide to, and it's a conscious decision every day to walk out of my office and to engage at home or in the community or wherever it is. It's a conscious choice. And over time, that choice has gotten easier because I, well, let me step back for a second and think about an example. When I was for many many years, I worked very very long hours at it was Arthur Anderson Consulting Accenture, and going up through that consulting model, and those long hours um, uh, just took a lot of energy and a lot of all for the right reasons, that we were doing amazing things for our clients and enabling tremendous outcomes and success. However, one of the things as I look back and realized is that oftentimes the activities ended up expanding to fill the time, and we would just keep working, working, working. And there is a time to do that, but I've learned that I can be more effective if I can balance that. And so it's a conscious choice. Like if I stay up all night working on something, I'm pretty well shot the next day because I'm not 22 years old coming out of college pulling all-nighters, whatever. And yet my freshest thinking is when I've had a good night's sleep, and that's when I'm most creative, I'm sharpest, and I'm a morning person. And so doing that, just it becomes less and less productive throughout the day, not evening, night. And then the next day is less productive. And it's like, if I would have just stopped, gone to bed, I would have been
Mhm.
much clearer in my thinking to do that. One other story, um, in my career at Accenture, the partners came and said, "Hey, we really want you to do strategy consulting. You have the right mind and you have the right, ability to communicate with clients and you're strategic and that sort of thing." And I said, "Let me consider that." And so I thought about it, and there were a couple of things that really kind of weighed in on that. Number one, I wanted to have a family. I got married, I wanted to have kids, and I wanted to and the strategists were typically on the road at least 5 and sometimes 6 or 7 days a week, at client sites, doing super important work, but they were gone all the time. And they also billed starting at 10 hours a day. Now, this is a long time ago, so I can't speak to what Accenture is today, but they started billing at 10 hours a day, not 8 hours a day like the regular consultants, IT consultants. And so my wife and I, we decided that I was not going to do that. And what that meant was that took me off a very fast partner track and moved me onto a slower track. And so there were trade-offs. I would still make that same decision today because I had 34 years of marriage, which many of the people either they struggled in their
Mhm.
marriage or I mean it was really so I'd make those decisions, but that it's a daily balance of how do I get something done because our clients deserve that and it's fulfilling professionally and personally for me. And yet, how do I engage with people, the people I work with, the people I serve, my family, my community? It's just and it ebbs and flows. It ebbs and
Yeah.
flows because sometimes there's times which I have to plow in and really put in the time and all the energy and all that and other things take a back seat and sometimes I can put some of those other things a little more forward without impacting, the other things.
Man, if there's any wisdom I wish I could have imparted in my past self in my 20s and early 30s, it's exactly what you described. I mean, the fact that you were able to make that hard decision, and be at peace with it. I mean, understand why you were making that decision. When I look back now, um, I wish I could have known it was going to be okay. I wish I because
Mm,
a lot a lot of that drive comes from I don't know if it's going to be okay. I don't
right,
know how it's going to work out.
right,
I want to dance faster and faster and faster,
right,
and then
right.
you-
And I
but
want to progress, and I want to make a good
absolutely,
living for my family, for like all those good
yeah.
reasons.
But the reasons can overwhelm you, and it's hard to give advice to someone else because not knowing their situation, sometimes you do have to dance fast, and
Yes.
then other times it is okay when you've given what you can give and then you shut down. I know I'm definitely guilty of today. um, I'll work, into the evening, and I won't even recognize how slow my brain has become. Like I'm just, barely making progress, like working on a
Ooh.
PowerPoint deck or something, and you go, a slide, okay, then another slide, and
Right.
and and then you put it away and wake up the next morning, and it's bam, 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 not only faster but definitely better.
Better.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, better. Dan, what you're referring to is I think it's there. We have to change the way we talk about this because we talk about work-life balance, but when we say work-life balance, that automatically, by the sequence of the words, puts a priority on the first work life, as if life ought to fit into whatever we're working, right? And yet, I think if we would simply change the order of the words, it would reset our mind and our actions would be different. Whereas if we think about a life work balance, then we're making these decisions that we just talked about. In that framework, work is super important. And let's face it, for some people, work is their life. And that's if that's what they want it to be, then that's fantastic. For some of us, though, there's life and work fits in, and it's a big part of life. A lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of thinking, all that, but it's part of life. And I wish that we could change leaders kind of just starting thinking about life work balance.
And you're right. It's a simple but potentially really profound shift if life is first, and then work has an important role.
Clearly.
And it does. If it keeps food on the table, if it gives us the freedom to have the life part, but life obviously for most should come first. Ideally, it's interesting. I have or had a consulting project where we were working with a client, and the client had done a needs analysis and a survey of a large group of leaders, and they'd identified all of the various training needs expressed by the leaders, and most of them had to do with productivity and accountability, and a variety of other very business oriented things. So I was tasked with reaching out to the leaders and getting the anecdotal version. So we had a list of topics. Now we were going to sort of peel the layers to see, okay, under the layer of productivity, what are you really looking for? What would really help you? Under accountability, what would really help you? So I had 30-40-minute conversations with over 20 leaders. And as we are having these conversations and as they get more comfortable, consistently what came up was the stress that they were under. So the need for greater productivity or productivity skills was actually just the way they were comfortable talking about, I don't seem to have enough time. I need to find a way to get more done in the time that I have. And then we would have a conversation about the stress they were under, the challenges they were facing. And at the end of all the conversations, I came away with a sense that what this group of leaders actually needs is more coping mechanisms, more ability to manage the day-to-day stress, and permission from their leadership to unplug, permission from their leadership to maybe dial it back a little, or at least be a little more human. So, I mean, you know me. What I did is I went back to their senior leadership and I said, well, here's what I'm actually observing. And their senior leadership was comfortable with helping with coping mechanisms. They were not comfortable with dialing it back. They were not comfortable with unplugging. And I thought, I'm not going to judge this, but it is fascinating. No wonder the leaders are feeling like they're on a hamster wheel and the wheel is not slowing down. The most senior leader that I worked with, he just said his reasoning, the reason they didn't want to dial things back, he said, this is an entrepreneurial environment. We're on a growth trajectory, and our mandate from the shareholders is to drive growth. And his mental model of how you drive growth is you spin that hamster wheel faster. You do more and more and more. And so for those leaders I was working with, you can't give them permission to unplug because they're not being given permission to unplug. But we did focus on coping mechanisms. But even that was uncomfortable for them, because to focus on coping mechanisms means acknowledging you're under stress.
There's a problem.
Yes, yeah, and that very, maybe it's a masculine dynamic. They were all men. Maybe it's a masculine dynamic. There was something about it where they just were not comfortable saying, yeah, we're a little overwhelmed, and we could use some help. So in the end, we did some good things for them, but I still walked away feeling like we didn't do the profound thing for them. We more like worked around the edges, so to speak.
And think about everybody that goes on vacation, and I count me in, I'm guilty as charged. It is very difficult to unplug. Oh, let me just check the email. Let me just check. Oh, this has to keep going while I'm gone. And some of that's absolutely true. And most of it is my choice and maybe my either desire to have control, or I haven't developed the people who are taking care of things while I'm gone, but it still comes back to me and the choice that I make.
So then where this kind of ties into the other work we're doing around leadership development is that um, one of the, I'll call it complaints, one of the complaints we hear from younger employees is that their leaders are not as kind as they were hoping. They are not as human as they were hoping. They don't connect with them as directly as they were hoping. And I've spoken to a lot of younger employees who have moved on from job to job to job in a search for a human leader, in a search for a human supervisor, in a search for someone
Mhm.
who sees them,
Who
who says, I
connects?
see you.
Who
Yeah. And we've got
absolutely.
hard work to do, and we are going to work hard. We are going to put in the hours, but I'm going to see you. And I'm going to sometimes guide you, coach you, mentor you as needed. And maybe it's not all going to be fun. There are going to be some hard times, but still that human connection. And I think when I was growing up and I was in my early career, of course we want those things, but I would never have demanded it. I grew up in the keep your nose to the grindstone, do your work,
Work it.
pay your dues, pay your dues.
Exactly.
Um,
Me too.
and like it or not, people are entering the workforce today without that sense of pay your dues. It is more of, I believe I deserve a
Mhm.
human leader. And if I don't start to feel it pretty quickly,
Then
I'm
I'm
going to
gonna
LinkedIn and see what else is there. And I'm
Sure.
going to move on and on and
Right.
on. Um,
Right.
so even those most hard driving leaders, I would hope that eventually they see there's a business case for being more human. I don't know if that will actually get them there, but I know that business case exists for sure.
Yeah, I do believe the business case exists, and in fact, although I've not seen research around this, um, it'd be interesting if HBR or somebody did a case study around this. But um, gosh, I actually find, although I can't give you numbers like statistics, that when I have a connection with someone that I'm leading, I actually get more out of that person than I would have if I were just kind of standoffish and or didn't engage. And now some
Mhm.
people don't want to engage personally. That's okay. But what I have found is that it's relational capital is what
Yeah.
like. I feel like when I invest time getting to know people, and that's being able to ask questions and get down to a pretty deep level pretty quickly is something that I've developed over time. And what that really does at the end of the day is it puts some deposits in like the bank account, relationship bank account, so that when these harder, more challenging times, when we really have to buckle down, or we really have to wrestle with each other to get to the where we need to get to, and we can always do that respectfully. um, it's easier to withdraw out of an account that has something in it.
Well, and also I think it's probably true that everyone wants that human connection. It just looks different for some people. It may
Agreed.
not look like it does. If you use like the disc behavioral model,
Mhm.
some people are very high eyes, very interactive, very expressive, very much want to go out for dinner, or very much want to
Right.
sit for a meal, or very much want to have the like what we would consider to be typical social interactions.
Sure.
But at the same time, there are those high C, high S individuals
Mhm.
who I'm certain they still want the connection, but it's going to look different for them.
Very much.
I can remember times where I've sat working on a project side by side with another engineer back,
Mm.
when I was in an engineering role, and the kind of connections that we ultimately developed, probably it wouldn't look like a human connection to someone else, but it was us sitting at a table working through problems, and we found ourselves really enjoying that, enjoying the fact that we could have conversations, we could focus on an actual tangible issue, um, and it ends up being a very human connection. It just looks different for
Right.
for, for some people, um,
Absolutely.
and I suppose there are cultural aspects to that as well, where some cultures express that connection differently than others.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of being, I mean, I know you to be a driven business leader. I know you to be someone who's focused on growth and growing a business. And so there have to be, I'm guessing that there have to be times when who you are as a human does meet up with the requirements or the demands
Hmm.
of business leadership, whether it's deciding there's somebody who's no longer a fit for the business,
Hmm.
whether it's deciding someone is no longer or maybe never was in the right role, sitting in the right seat on the bus for the business, or changing the focus of investments or priorities.
Hmm.
Any any examples come to mind? Any tough situations come to mind where you and where you had to go through a thoughtful process, and ultimately, how do you balance the human side with the business side?
Yeah. Um, Hiring salespeople comes to mind. So I'll give you two examples. I hired a salesperson who had a good track record, got into the interview, did well in the interview, and I thought, I'm just not sure whether they're going to make the long haul or not. And uh, and then they got in the job and they excelled and did it, over the long haul, just far better than I ever expected, and exceeded certainly my expectations, and really did amazingly well. Contrast that with a person who the resume looked amazing, the track record was phenomenal, great interview, and then the salesperson started, and like within the first week, a little flag goes up, like, Wait a minute, something's off here." And like in 3 or 4 weeks, um, I realized, and this is one of those life lessons, like that I've learned, that if we're going to um, if we're going to make a change, it's better to make the change earlier, sooner, as soon as they figure out that change needs to be made, rather than trying to keep pushing this boulder up the hill. And because that gets really hard, stressful, exhausting for both of us. And so it was only like 3 weeks in, and I said, "Hey, this has turned out very differently than what you and I talked about, what we imagined. What's really going on? And we talked through this, and we realized that the fit just wasn't there." Now, I take responsibility for that, because when I'm hiring people, it's my responsibility to teach, to make sure it's clear what the expectations are, and who we are and how we work and what we do, and all that sort of thing. And there is some responsibility on the salesperson side too, in terms of representing themselves well. And it's not that this was misrepresented, but it was in the context of what we do, the fit wasn't there. I, I, super. I want to make those choices sooner than later, because they get
Mhm.
more expensive, they get harder, they get, the Velcro starts to stick closer and you pull that apart, and that gets it's much more painful. So if we can recognize that sooner and make the choice, that's easier.
And I imagine, ultimately, if the fit isn't really there, that choice is going to have to be made at some point. You
It's
can't
going to.
just keep hanging on. And the sooner the choice is made, the better it is for, and these are easy words to say, the
They're
better it
easy.
is for them as
Right.
well. I
Right.
mean, and I may not
Right.
feel that way for that person, but I know it's better for them when there's a clear mismatch. I think where it becomes most challenging is when the mismatch isn't totally obvious, where they're
So,
not awful in
right.
whatever the role might be,
Whatever.
but they end up needing more coaching, more guidance than you would have originally expected. And
Right.
then you think, well, all right, I'll give a little more direction and coaching. And then sometimes that sets everything right. So then they're good. But I've had situations where, I'll be honest, I hung on to people much longer than I should have
Mm.
because they weren't so bad.
Mm.
It was hard to even think, how do you have the conversation with somebody, because they've done good work, but
Right.
not the great work that I was
Right.
hoping for. And then, to me, the big lesson, I had a situation where I hung on to someone for a long time. Eventually, all right, I hate to admit it, I just waited until they quit. They went on to something else. And then when I went through the hiring process, I found a replacement who was fantastic,
Mm.
who was everything I could have hoped for. And I found myself thinking, I spent 2 years without this.
Why did
Yeah. What a huge opportunity loss for.
Yeah.
And then it turns out the person that I did not fire, they moved on to a much better career for them.
They
It was
were happier. They were more productive. They were
they made a shift.
contributing.
They decided, this isn't right for me. I'm taking another direction. They were much happier.
Mhm.
Everyone was much happier. And I remember expressing this story to my wife, and she said, sometimes your partner can be more direct with you than anybody else.
Of course.
And she said, what surprises me is you talk all the time about leadership. Where was the leadership in that? You sound more like the passenger. You waited until that person moved on. You waited until someone else, showed up who
Mm.
was a lot
Mm.
better. You sort of were a passenger on that train. And she's not wrong. She's not wrong.
Yes, it's
Could have
true.
been a little more gracious, could have been a little more kind in the way it's expressed, but definitely not wrong in that
Yes,
observation.
that's true. And
Um,
we all need people, whether it's our
yeah.
partner or it's our coworker, it's our, leader. We all need people who will help us kind of stay on track. And that's,
And
yeah,
a lot of times the feedback that keeps us on track is not the comfortable feedback.
no,
It's not because that we give ourselves. We validate ourselves. What we need is the person who can objectively say, you might want to think about that a little differently. You might want to consider, something that you're not currently considering. And I know I've learned, my personality is that I instantly reject any of that. And at least I've learned that because I used to not have that self-awareness. I used to just reject and
right.
then validate my rejection. At least now I recognize, okay, so you did the thing that you do. Now let's back up, take a breath,
Yeah.
and reconsider the potential wisdom in that comment. Have you made any big mistakes that you've learned from? I mean, any things that others might, learn from your mistakes?
Hmm. A lot of mistakes. What would others learn from? Um, yeah, when I left Accenture, I left because a guy that actually worked for me called and said, "Hey, we just went public with this company, and we opened an office in Denver. We need some leadership. Would you join? And I said, well, so I went through the interview process, and I left and Accenture and went to this new role. And one of the things that I did, which is part of my personality that has a really good side, and then there's a little bit of an underbelly, and that is I have a bias toward action. Like, even like if I'm going somewhere, even if I don't know exactly where it is, I know it's that way and that way, and I'm directionally correct, almost all the time, directionally correct. And I'll figure out along the way, is like, okay, I need to turn here, and that sort of thing, as opposed to let me stop and until I figure out the exact path, then I'll start. That's not me. I'm going to get started. I'll start moving. It's that bias toward action. So I jump into this role, and in the first 2 or 3 weeks, there was a client presentation, and my boss was supposed to go. The account was his. I was taking over the account, and then his boss was going to be there. It was in California, and I saw some weather was coming into Denver, and so I said, I would feel more comfortable if I just, if we flew out tonight as opposed to tomorrow, because the meeting was, flying west. It was easy to fly in, go to the meeting, fly out. And he said, I can't fly out tonight. I'll just fly out in the morning. The weather will be fine. Well, I get out there, and he doesn't make it because of a snowstorm, right? And then I'm with his boss, and we go into this meeting. My boss is on the video call. I'm in the room. I've been introduced as the guy who's taking the account. And then the CEO of this organization, a large computer equipment organization, starts asking some very pointed questions. I didn't know the answers. And my boss back in Denver wasn't jumping in to say, hey, Scott just joined, and we're getting him up to speed. Let me tell you what there was silence.
Wow.
Silence.
Wow.
And I'm trying to, navigate through this situation.
Well, the boss's boss is right
he's
there,
right there sitting, like, he's looking at me
observing.
going, what, like. So the lesson is, even though I may have a bias toward action, tempering that and pacing it such that I am positioned to be successful as I navigate into that. Because the reality is, I said, hey, I really want to go to this meeting. It's going to be in my account. I really want to go. I wasn't going to go. And my boss said, well, I guess it makes sense. You're going to be taking over the account. And that was a mistake on my part, because I tried to go too fast. And there were some other factors, right? Like, I didn't have the air cover support that would have made that a better outcome. However, I pushed to go in, but I wasn't ready to go in. And this was after I had a long career at Accenture. I thought, so I keep learning, and I would say, temper the pace so that the pace enables success.
There's real insight in that, because almost every one of our characteristics that we think serve us, if taken to an extreme, or not even just an extreme, if just taken a little too far,
Right.
actually work against us. Your drive and ambition can work against you. Your ambition can get in the way of your ambition. It's probably also true that kindness and humanity, if taken to an extreme,
Sure,
can get in the way. any other aspect. I had a colleague who was a really good salesperson, primarily because he was a people person,
Mhm.
and that's what he always focused on was
Mm.
the people, the relationships, and everybody really liked him. And he didn't feel the pressure to become a technical expert because, as far as he was concerned, was he was the people person, and he would bring in
Right.
the technical
Right.
experts. But there did come a point where that began to limit
Mhm.
who he was, and it began to limit his
So
career progress
so true.
because as he looked at other positions, as he looked at growing in the business, he was not going to get he was not going to be getting a
Mm-mm.
promotion to a management role because he was viewed as the people guy.
Right.
And the people that were getting promoted were the people slash technology. They had
The
like
balance
the
of
double strengths.
absolutely.
And so I again, it's one of those lessons that I wish someone had tapped me on the shoulder 20 or 30 years ago and said, just moderate some of your more extreme tendencies. Don't let your ambition get in the way of your ambition. Don't let you know
Right.
your technical focus get in the way, because sometimes it's not all about the tech. Sometimes
Right.
it's not all about the engineering. Sometimes it's about the people involved. And most of the time that awareness comes from experience.
Mhm.
But as impatient as young leaders are today, I think that anything we can do to help them learn from our experience and
Yes.
accelerate their development, that's
Yes.
going to be ultimately very helpful.
How do we
Um,
set them up for success by helping them navigate at the appropriate pace to be able to take on and be successful? Successful for them,
exactly.
our company, and our clients.
I was asking this question about what was like your greatest mistake as a leader that you learned from, and I asked that question a fair amount, and there was a point where something struck me because I've been thinking about myself as well,
Mhm.
but I had not connected some dots, and I remember this happened a few months ago. Suddenly, some dots connected where there were three major speed bumps, and they were more than
Mm.
speed bumps, and in every case. Um, Quick story I'll tell you about the first one. I was working a job that I really liked. Life was good. Someone reached out to me. Basically, they headhunted me, and they said a lot of great things. They really liked me. They schmoozed me, and I'm not someone who I would think of as being susceptible to flattery, but man, I was.
But it
And
feels good to be
they
courted. It
oh, it
feels good
does.
to be
It
pursued.
feels
It
so
feels
good, and
good to
I left a position that was great. I liked the people, they liked me. Um, I and I I moved. I took another position. It was more money, more responsibility. It was definitely a step up, but the person I was reporting to was awful, and there were all kinds of awful things. So now, fast
Right.
forward many years later, I'm in a position as the head of the board for a small school, and we had to hire a new director for the small school. And um, we were interviewing a lot of candidates, and one particular candidate, I realize now, I didn't realize it at the time,
Mm.
totally schmoozed me. He was he had done his research on who I was. He
Mhm.
had so many great, kind things to say, and I really liked him. But
Right.
as I look back, I liked him because he liked me. I
Yeah.
liked him because and he was, looking back, it now seems obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me at the time. And it was a wrong hiring decision. We hired the wrong person, and we hired it at my insistence. I really sold him to the rest of the board
Mm.
members because I thought, yeah, this is the right
This is the
guy.
guy.
And long story short, ended up being really a not good thing at all. And then it happened again in the last 10 years. And as I was thinking about this and I connected those three dots, I realized I am much more susceptible to that kind of schmoozing than I
Mm.
ever would have thought. And I
Mm.
don't know what it means about me. I don't know what it says about me, but I think connecting those dots is important for me so that going into the future, and it hasn't happened recently. So either either well, for either I'm not deserving of this kind of flattery that I was receiving, or for whatever reason it hasn't happened, or maybe I am more aware of it now. So those types of people who might do that aren't doing it. Who knows? But I think each of us as a leader is on a journey where we're trying things out. And I, similar to you, I have a bias toward trying,
Yes.
bias toward doing. Step in this direction. If it doesn't work, step in another direction. And so maybe all of us, the more we step, the more we try, the more we do, ultimately the more that we learn. But it was just interesting to me that even at this age, I can have a sudden revelation, like, oh yeah, I was worked. I was worked, and now I can learn from that and go on. So the growth doesn't stop. The evolution doesn't stop. There's no point at which we like arrive at the peak, and now we are the ultimate evolved leader.
It's true. It's true. And I believe as human beings, we're wired for connection. It's like how we're created. And many of us, I certainly was, and I still am. I want to be liked. And one of my bosses said, "Scott, it's fine to be liked, but it's better to be respected." And I thought that was a very interesting point. Now, does that respect come from doing things that are dislikable? That doesn't have to
Probably
be.
not.
Doesn't have to be. It can be. We can be a jerk to, and drive salespeople or drive, whoever to get results. But I think what you're describing is insightful because you took a moment to step back and to look, and you started to see some points that you connected the dots that you just expressed. And that's what leaders do. A leader can step back, survey, the forest and the landscape and go, there, that's connected by a line. What does that mean? It means I need to be a different leader. It means
yeah, and now I just connected a fourth dot. Not that it happened a fourth time, but I was recently doing a round of interviews, and one of the interviewees had clearly done his research. So he referenced the book that I wrote that HarperCollins published. He referenced my podcast. He referenced the LinkedIn profile. He referenced various things throughout the interview very expertly. It was and I remember now thinking, okay, that's nice. And it's not bad. Like, I don't judge that at all. That's probably what
he did his research. Good.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah, good. And that doesn't drive the decision.
Right.
That's all good. And in fact, to some degree, that tells me, okay, you're someone, if you're in a sales role, you're going to do your research. So that was all healthy to a degree, but I didn't let myself get sucked into it like I would have, long in the past. So you said an interesting thing. You're wired for connection. You think most people are wired for connection, which I would completely agree with. And you work in a primarily remote work environment. You work from your home in Denver, Colorado. You work with folks in a home office in New Jersey. You work with me in Jamestown, North Dakota. You work with people around the world.
Right.
And while you do certainly get out and travel and connect when you can, if we were to look at your actual time, I would think 70% of your time, 80% of your time is with virtual connecting of your colleagues, your direct reports. How do you bring humanity to that remote work? How do you bring connection to that remote work environment?
Intentionally, right? And what I mean by that is, first, I'm an introvert that likes to process externally. Not an extrovert. I'm not energized by being around a whole bunch of people. I'm drained by being around a whole bunch of people. I love people and I love being with people. And then I need to have time to re-energize, if you will. So, but when I say intentional, I mean, setting up time with people that the agenda is just to catch up, even for 5 minutes. Hey, what's going on? How's your son in your daughter in the little league soccer? Or what are you reading? Or whatever it happens to be. And I think it's so important. That's part of the way I stay connected.
Mhm.
I could always do it more, yet, but I think having those discussions that are outside of, here's the purpose, here's the agenda, here's the desired outcome of this meeting, and well, I'm a big fan, like, really, about having that in each meeting invite. The reality is we need meetings where it's just like the water cooler. We
Yeah.
can't physically stand around the water cooler, but we can do it virtually, and we can pass each other. But we have to be intentional about it.
And being intentional means proactively setting aside that time, because if we all work together in a physical location in a traditional office, you could come in the morning and you'd have lots of like unconscious cues where,
Absolutely.
I see, Dan is at his desk with his head, in his
Right.
hands. I see those two people over there, laughing
Right.
and having a cup of coffee. I can, lean into someone's office,
Right.
and have a quick little chit chat. You have all of these signals
Yes. Well,
happening.
the door's closed, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and some days you hear the buzz, other days not so much. I
Right.
wonder what's going on. And in the remote world, that doesn't happen. And so then you have to make it. You have to create those connections and reach out. And it's probably uncomfortable for some people at first. I've done the same thing, and at first with a couple of my direct reports, even though I've said the words, this is about us, this is about just human connection, this is a water cooler,
Right.
they almost instinctively lean into talking about projects. They
No,
almost
right. Like,
instinctively lean into,
just,
hey, since I got you, let me give you a quick
yeah.
update.
No,
And
it's not why I called.
I bought into it at first. I mean, I actually, since we have the time, sure, let's do a little quick update on something.
Right.
And I later, upon reflection, I thought, okay, I need to stop that. I need to be the person who says, that's not what this is about.
Right.
This is about us. This is about you as a human. And we have our time, and we have our regular weekly updates. We'll get that done. Or you can send me a Teams message, or you can send me an update. So let's back up. Let's take a deep breath and just tell me something interesting or weird or fun that you've
Right.
been doing recently.
Right.
I'll do the same. Maybe I'll model that. I'll tell you something weird or interesting or fun about me.
Yeah.
The other thing, this goes way back years ago. Someone who was giving me really good guidance as a leader. As I think Scott, I can be pretty serious.
Mhm.
I can drill down and get stuff done.
Yep.
And I had a leadership coach say to me, when you relax, when you give yourself time, you can actually be kind of funny. I mean, not hilarious, but like borderline funny. You can,
Right.
but he said, I would lean into that if I were you. I
Mm.
would go out of my way to be a little goofy when you can be,
Yep.
to share some of your, what he referred to as smart ass commentary,
Right.
because number one, it lightens you in other people's eyes. It also keeps you engaged.
Right.
And it just changes the seriousness of it. And so then I would say you go back 20 years, maybe 25 years now. And there was a shift that occurred at that point where I realized, okay, that's part of who I am as a human. I am someone who likes to roil the waters a little bit, and likes to say, what things that I perceive to be humorous, which might be a little edgy at times. And since that's who I really am, bringing that to the mix actually relaxes people, actually says,
Yes.
okay, he's not all that. He's not all serious.
Right.
So
Right.
me modeling who I am as a human, even people who don't actually like the jokes, They
Right.
still see me as more of a human, which gives them permission to be more of a
Absolutely.
human. For
It's a
sure.
different level of connection.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's what it does. It creates a different level of connection as opposed to only professional, like just on task, on point, all that. Um,
Do you ever find yourself wishing
intentionality.
you'd been
Go
as smart? Do you ever find yourself wishing that, if you could just take your brain today and plug it into who you were in your mid-20s or mid-30s, life would be so good. I'm sorry I cut you off. You were about to
No,
say
no,
something.
no. Yeah, it's the time machine. Sign me up when you get that figured out. No, I was thinking about just going back to intentionality. Besides those non or just um, personal transparency calls, or interactions, being intentional about bringing people along, like bringing someone into a client meeting just to observe or to participate, right? And it's a way for leaders to model, for me to model, like how to navigate, different client situations. It's also a way for me to learn where is the person and where is their mind. Like, walk me through your thought process of what were you thinking when the client started to go this direction, but we really wanted the client to go that way. And there's a wonderful learning opportunity there if we'll simply engage them. Now,
Mhm.
look, it's an investment because it takes their time and my time, but I found that the dividend is pretty large.
You know, so many of the things that we've been talking about this last hour, and this has been great. So much of it boils down to intentionally dedicating the time,
Yeah.
deciding it's important enough that I will give it the time,
Right.
which I know it's so easy to say, and I know it's hard to do. We are overwhelmed with to-do items. We're overwhelmed with tasks. Truthfully, if I didn't stop myself, I could work 20 hours a day. I mean, it doesn't
Right.
stop. It absolutely never stops. Someone did remind me a while back. Um, he said, you're lucky you work in one of those businesses where if you just stop, it's not like anything horrible happens. It's not like, fires or pestilence or people die or people get sick or
Right.
buildings collapse. Oh, so a training curriculum was 24 hours late. It's not, again, nothing hugely dramatically bad happens. Now, I don't use that as an excuse for being late, but it's a good
No.
mindset to say,
Yeah.
okay, there are areas where really bad things happen if something doesn't get delivered or done on time. But sometimes when the question is, do I dedicate the time to connecting with him or her, or do I dedicate it to getting those next 10 emails
Right.
sent out? Maybe leaning a little more toward connecting with him or her
Sure.
is the right thing.
And it's an ebb and flow, right? So sometimes those 10 emails have to go out. That person or
Yeah.
those people are going to have to wait. And sometimes the people actually need the attention, and the timing is such that I really have to connect with them, or if I connect with them, that's going to, it's the right timing. So part of it is figuring it out. When is the right timing for each and balancing it?
So I want to be respectful of your time, and we're at the end of our hour. And I honestly, I know we could go on for a long, long time having this conversation. Any final thoughts? It's not fair, but if I were to say, if you were to crystallize all the wisdom of Scott Margason, into a couple of brief comments, anything that comes to mind, and I know it's not a fair question, so if nothing in particular comes to mind, I'll just edit this part out. But uh,
Any question on the podcast is a fair question.
all right,
I'm not sure the answer will be,
yeah.
worth publishing, but they're all fair questions. Um, Gosh, I love the question because it really it, it it just it encapsulates kind of who I am. So let me give a
Mhm.
stab at this. This may be a list, but but like For me, it all starts with purpose, like my own purpose, my company purpose, the organization purpose, the purpose of my clients. Think of a nonprofit that works with kids. All the purpose is where it all starts. So be purposeful, if you will. Be authentic. People read, they read through this pretty fast, right?
Mhm.
If I'm not authentic. So if I'm authentic, I'm engaging, I'm empathetic, I can be outcomes focused still, right? I Because so much of how I'm wired is about people, like it's a how do we celebrate the people? And how do we celebrate the success?
Mhm.
Sometimes how do we learn from the failure and celebrate that what we learned, even though it didn't go as
Yeah.
well as we wanted. Um, Being biased toward action, that's a given. Being willing to be wrong, apologize, and adjust. That's just humility. But if we're authentically that way, people are much more likely to reciprocate, which means then we can really learn from each other. And then I would say if I can balance facts and my own intuition or gut, the best choice is usually somewhere based on both. And the people that I have enjoyed learning leadership from have been really good storytellers.
Fantastic. So again, thank you. For those of you who are with us, listening or watching the podcast, just remember to like this episode and subscribe to the podcast, whether you're watching it on video through YouTube or you're listening through Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever the source for you is. Like and subscribe, and you'll be notified for future podcast deliveries. Scott, fantastic. Thank you so much. Can't say thank you enough. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thanks, Dan.